All right, guys, welcome back. So we're going to jump right into setting up our configurations for our JWT. So I'm going to create a new section in our app settings file. I'm going to call it JWT. And basically, we're just going to hard code some values that we know we'll need along the way when issuing and validating. All right, so I'm going to say issuer, and this means that I am the issuing authority. So you can put your application name or your domain name, whatever it is. I'm just going to say the application name here, Hotel Listing API. So that means only when a JWT or a token comes in with this issuer will I pay attention. But you'll see more to that later on. And there are other things you can put in here. You can put in like the preset expiration time. Actually, you can put a key here because there is a key value that is going to be used to set up the token. However, generally speaking, you don't want to put that key in the app settings file because of security reasons, right? So if you put it there, then somebody can see the app settings file and then figure out the key that's being used. I'm putting in a GUID value here, but this could easily just be your name or whatever, something unique that you want to use to verify or generate the key, right? So alternatively, instead of putting something that's sensitive inside of the app settings file, because you don't want too much sensitive information in this file, what you could do is create an environment variable. Now, of course, if you create it on the development machine, then you have to make sure you create it also on the server when it is deployed. So a quick way to bring up the environment or set up, the environment variable is to bring up command prompt. Make sure you're in administrator mode. So if it is that this has to happen on a machine at work where you don't have administrator privileges, then you have to make sure that you include this in your release notes so that the system administrator or DevOps engineer, whoever is doing the deployment, knows what to do. So I'm going to say set X, and once again, this is an environment variable, so this goes down to the Windows level. So unless a hacker was or somebody malicious was able to access the actual OS and log into the machine, they probably will never see this value or this key. All right. So I'm going to call this key, give it the value. So once again, this is just a GUID that I generated. It's complicated enough. It doesn't necessarily have to be this complicated. But once again, it's context is everything, right? So whatever value you put there, you just make sure you wrap it in quotation marks. Let me do that. So key, open quotes, the value, close quotation, /m. And the /m basically is saying that it must be a system variable and not a local variable. So that's why you need to make sure that you're admin. So you see, it was saved. All right. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and create our service extension because we need to extend our startup. So once again, instead of doing it here, we'll just go over to service extensions and create a new method. This one we're going to, and it has to be public static void. So I'll just copy this up until this part and say configure JWT. And then we're taking the same parameters of the services, but then we're also taking iConfiguration, right? So iConfiguration, which gives us access to the app settings configuration stuff, right? For a little context of that, when we, let me see. All right. So you see here, we said configuration, get connection string, iConfiguration, right? So that's what we're referencing over here, iConfiguration. So go ahead and include anything that's missing. And then inside this file is where a bit of magic is going to happen. So we're going to say var JWT settings is equal to, and then I'm going to call on the configuration dot get section. And the section that we're going to be getting is JWT settings. All right, so that's what, let me just verify that I spelled it. Oh, it's JWT. Apologies, I call it JWT. All right, this is giving an error, and I think it's because I included the wrong library. So let me try that again. I configuration, and I want extensions.configuration, not automappers. So let me try that again. And there we go, no errors. All right, so the secret key now, let's just say var key is equal to, and then I can call an environment dot get environment variable. And remember that we set the name of this environment variable just now. I'm going to bring back up my command prompt. I set it to key. So whatever you use there, that is the name of your environment variable. So key. Next, we want to say services.add authentication. So I'm going to add an authentication option with options. Sorry, let me just get this. So whether you say OPT or you just say O, but lambda. And then I'm just going to open and close brace because we have quite a few configurations that will be going in here. So anytime you have multiple lines, you can just open the curly brace and then each line ends with a semicolon. So I'm going to say O.default authentication scheme is equal to, and then they have JWT bearer defaults. So what's not here, and I think I need a few libraries or so on from NuGet. So let me just check JBearer. So there it is. So I need to include the Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication JWT bearer. So let me go ahead and get that. Now it's included. JWT bearer defaults dot authentication scheme. So this is basically saying that I'm adding authentication to the application, and the default scheme that I want is the JWT. All right. So off the bat, once somebody tries to authenticate, check for a bearer token. That's basically what that is saying. And then default challenge scheme is the same thing. All right. So check for that for authentication and challenge whatever information comes across, challenge it based on the JWT standard, right? And then we're extending this. So I'm just going to remove this semicolon for a bit. So I'm going to say in the next line dot add JWT bearer. And then this once again is going to have options. So I'm going to do my token, lambda, and then open and close curly brace. And let me just fix the indentation, right? So then we say O dot token validation parameters. So there are quite a few parameters that you can set up along the way. Each person might be different. Once again, the situation might be different. So what I'm doing is just educational, but in your enterprise setting, you may have other needs than what I am going to portray here. So if that turns out to be your situation, then you just act accordingly, right? So new token validation parameters, and then we're going to now outline some of the parameters that we want to use to validate that this token, should grant somebody access. So then here we can say, do we want to validate who issued the token? That's generally a good idea, considering that we went through all the trouble of saying, here is the issuer. So that means if somebody puts some other value there, then we're saying, well, if another value is there, then it should be invalid. Do we want to validate the lifetime, right? So this way we'll reject the token if it is expired, we automatically reject it. So do you want to do that? Yes. And then another one that we would probably want to do is validate the issuer signing key. And we already established that this was the key value up top here, right? So we want to make sure that it was the correct signing key. And then we continue. And then I'm going to say that a valid issuer, or the valid issuer for any given token, would be JW settings, JWT settings, which is the config section, dot get section out of that, and then it would be issuer, right? So whatever value is set for the issuer, I want that dot value. There we go. And then let's say the issuer signing key is equal to a new symmetric. So now we're going to be hashing it. So that's why I said it can be a complicated value. It doesn't necessarily have to be, because when it's going to set it up, we're going to be hashing it anyway. So we say new symmetric security key, and then we encode. So you see, even with my very, very complicated one that was based on a GUID, we're encoding this, and then we're going to hash it again afterwards, right? So that's why I said that it doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated, but encoding.utf get bytes, so we're breaking it down to bytes, and then we pass in the key value that we got from the environment. So the most important part about the key is don't put it in the app settings, right? It's frowned upon. It could have gone there, but to be out of abundance of caution, you put it in the environment variables. I have put it in the app settings before, but then that was for a very internal application, not necessarily public facing, right? So we just go ahead and include any missing references there. And then I think that's just about it for validation parameters. But once again, based on your situation, you may need more validations than I am putting here, right? So this is all I'm going to use, semicolon, semicolon, and then that's it for our extensions. So now we can go over to startup, and we can call on our configure JWT. So services.configure JWT, and we have that configuration object being passed down the line, right? And then we can just do a build just to make sure everything is okay. So after a successful build, we can continue with our task. So the next thing that I want to do is create some functionality for the validation and the issuing of the token, right? So I'm going to go up. Let me just collapse everything in the project, all right? And then in our, well, I have iRepository and repository. So what I'm going to do is create another folder called services. I just want to make sure everything is well segregated so I know where what is. So services would be for our extensions, right? I'm going to add a new class. I'm sorry. I should have named this iAuth Manager. So add a new class, call it iAuth Manager. If you end up doing exactly what I did, you just rename the file and it will automatically rename that. But then, sorry, it's not a class, it's an interface. There we go. So in this interface, I want to have a task that's going to return Boolean, and I want to call it validate user. And then this is going to take the login user DTO, and I'll just call it user DTO for uniformity purposes. There we go. Go ahead and include any missing references as usual. And then I'm going to have something else that will create and return the token. So I'm going to call it create token. All right. So I need a class to consume them, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and add, and I'm going to call this one auth manager. This one is actually a class which is going to inherit from its interface namesake, which is then going to say, please implement the methods that you told me I should have. Before we move on, we have to make sure that we register our service in our bootstrapper here in the startup.cs file. So we're just going to say services.addScoped and have iAuth manager mapped to auth manager, and we're once again adding it as scoped. So that's very important. So where were we? We're going to create this token. So inside of auth manager, I am going to be putting down I'm going to be injecting two things. So I need firstly, I need the user manager, which I can easily get from account manager. So I need that exact instance of user manager, right? And I'll just go ahead and include the missing reference. And I'll also need to inject an instance of the configuration manager. So I'll just go ahead and make representations for those and then finish the injection. And once that's done, we can continue. So let's start off with validating the user. I think that's a lower hanging fruit. So let's just deal with that one first, right? So when we want to validate the user, we basically say, we want to say, does this user exist in the system and is the password correct, right? So I can say var user is equal to await user manager dot find by name async. And then remember that for this find by name basically means find by the username. There it is. It's asking for the username and we're using the email address as the username. So we're only asking for email address in the DTO, but system wise, we're storing that as a username also, right? So I can just go ahead and do that. And this is saying, oh, so await, that means I need my async, right? So anytime you know you write a perfect await statement and you're still getting a red line, just double check if you have the async. It tends to slip, but with practice, it becomes permanent. So then after we check if we have found this user, so this is going to return the user's object and store it here. Then I'm going to say, and I'm just going to, instead of writing an if statement, I'm just going to write out like a ternary operator to say user not equal to null. And so just double check. Well, this is not a ternary statement. This is just a logic statement. So return if the user is not equal to null and user manager dot check password async. I would say user dot password. Sorry, not user DTO, because we don't know the password hash. So user DTO dot password. So this is automatically going to see if this password is valid for the user that is being checked. So if we return somebody with that username and the password is valid, well, this is going to return true or false based on the outcome of all of that. And what we are missing here is, oh, we need the user object. So I need user, comma, user DTO.password. There we go. So it's going to check the password, see if it's valid. And this already would have something if that username existed. And then we would know it's a valid user attempt. Now let us flesh out what happens in the create token operation. So here we want to create an object for signing credentials. And I'm going to want to get what we call claims. And I think I need to include a reference. All right, so for the create token portion now, we want to do a few things. We want to create some signing credentials, we want to get claims, and then we want to add them to the token option. So I'm just going to write them line by line. Get the signing credentials, get claims, and then create token options. All right, we have to create these methods, so don't worry about the red lines right now. But then at the end of the operation, I'm going to say return new JWT security. And more than likely, this needs something. So JWT security token handler, let's check. So we have to include this identity model tokens.jwt, this, and that's a method, or that's a class, dot write token. which is also a method, but it takes the token options. So whatever we get back here is based on what we get back here and based on what we get back there. All right, so let's start off with this one. So I'm just going to hover over it and generate the method for it, and it can be private. We don't need it to have any public operation. So we're getting the signing credentials. So the first thing I need to do is get the key. All right, and we're going to do a similar operation to what we did in the service extensions to get the key. So I just went over and copied and pasted those two lines. The key is gotten from the environment variable, and then we encode it to get that secret. And then the next thing that we're going to do is just return new signing credentials, and that's going to have the secret. So secret here would be the encoded version, right? Secret, comma, and then we let it know that the security algorithm used for this was the HM SHA-256. All right, there we go. So that's taking care of the signing credentials, right? Now let's do the get claims. So I'm just going to hover over that one, do the same generate method stub for it. All right, and then and I just noticed that this is of type object, so I'm going to make it very explicit that it is signing credentials. That's the return type of this, right? I'm sure object would have worked, but I just like to make sure everything is strongly typed. All right, so this one, let me just go ahead and make it async, and it needs to be a task that is going to return a list of claims. All right, so the reason we have to go through all of this is, or claim rather, not claims. The reason we have to go through all of this to define the types is that we said var. If we were explicit up top here, then it would have inferred what return types to put. But because we said var, it doesn't know, so it's just being very vague. All right, so let us go ahead and get the claims. So I'm going to declare a new list. Var claims is equal to a new list of type claim, and we're going to add a new claim. And then the thing with claims is that these are the bits and pieces of information that really tell who or what you can do, right? So I claim to be this, or I claim to be able to do that. So those are the things that we want to make sure are included in our application, or in our token rather. So the first claim that I want to add is the claim types dot. And when you look, there are a bunch of enums. So these are all claim types that are there. See, role is there. You can add multiple roles, email, all of those wonderful things, right? So I'm going to say name. Name generally means username, email, self-explanatory, etc. So if I said I wanted to add a claim type name, the name of the user who was just validated, which, all right, I'm going to have to change something here. So I am keeping the user local to validate user, which means then I would have to try and pass that along. So what I'll do here is create another variable here of type API user, and I'm going to call it user. And then instead of localizing user in validate, I'm just going to do that. So once we're in the context of this class, we will have access to the user data that is added, right? So let's continue. So name is going to come from user dot, and we'll just use, well, we can use username, right? Like for like. So in a situation where you wouldn't be using the email as a username, then you have the username to use as the name claim. And at minimum, you would want to have that, right? Then we can say var roles, and then we can await and use user manager to get the roles for the user. So there's get roles async. There we go. And we're just passing the user. So it's automatically going to go fetch all the roles for this user and return them in the form of a list. There we go, a list. And then for each of those, we want to add them. So for each role in roles, we want to add that claim. So I can say claims dot add, and then I would just say new claim the same way we did it here. We'll just say claims dot add new claim, but then claim type would be role, and then the role coming back, or the role to be added, would be role from our loop. All right, and then after all of that, and we built it up, and once again, based on the claims that you wish to put in, you can see all of the potential claims here. You can put in as many as you want, right? Once you're done that, you can just return claims. So that's 2 down and 1 more to go, right? So I'm just going to generate this method stub now, which is going to combine the signing credentials and the claims and create the actual token to be issued to the user, right? So here, the return type would be of type JWT security token, right? So JWT security token, just so that we're very explicit as to what it should be. Now, inside of this method, we're going to be saying that var, so we have to get the settings, var JWT settings is equal to, and I really don't want to retype this. Let me see if I can just get it quickly here. Arguably, I could have retyped it, but that's fine. Var settings is that. Then we say var options, or token options, is equal to new JWT security token. And then we have to use this constructor. So we don't want an empty one, of course. So we're going to fill in certain parameters. So I'm going to specify that the issuer that I want is coming from the JWT settings section for the valid issuer, just like what we had here. That is the issuer that we want. So we put that as the issuer there. The next one would be the claims. And then the claims would come from our list claims, which was passed down in the parameters here, right? And then we want to set expiration. So expiration is always good to set. So it actually asks you for an expires value. Now you could set 15, you could set 10. I mean, you could do that. Or you could just modify the settings file and set the value there, right? So since that's where all of my hard-coded values are going, I'm just going to keep it uniformed. And so I'm going to just say get that value from the settings file. It's in the section called lifetime. So that means this value, this token once created, will only be valid for 15 minutes. Let me just correct that, all right? And then the signing credentials, which we set already or actually passed down, would be here. Now, once all of that is done, we go ahead and we return our options. Or let me name this more appropriately. This is the token, because this is the creation of the token. So we're returning the token, and then that is token, right? Then we serialize it into a string and return that string. Now we've done quite a bit of work here, and the one thing that we probably need to do afterwards is to make sure that and I'm sorry, I'm just seeing an error here with the configuration. It was the wrong one. Let me just make sure I have the right one. Do a build. So I was saying that we've done quite a bit here to get our token things up and running. So what we want to do is, all right, I'm sorry. So this is good. So because I had the wrong configuration, I wasn't seeing this error. Expire should be a date time, and I only put 15 minutes. So let me let me redo that. So I'm going to say var expiration is equal to, and what should really happen is we say date time dot now. When was the token asked for? Let's add a few minutes. So whatever it is, whatever threshold you want. So if it is add a day, add minutes, add hours, you just say add that appropriate one. So it's add minutes. And then we would put in the value. And value here is string. So that means I need to do something like a convert dot to, and I'll just say to int32. Or does this require double? I think that requires double. So let me do a convert to double instead. Break line and close that. So add minutes convert to double. There we go. I'm sorry. Yeah. There we go. So we do that convert to double, and then expires is getting the value from the expiration, right? So at that point, we know when the token would no longer be valid, and I'm missing a semicolon here. Let me do a build, and we have no errors. So I was saying, when we come back, we will explore how authentication actually, or authorization actually, one, prevents access to our resources, and then two, how we actually set up the endpoint to authenticate the user and issue the token accordingly.